Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Tina Kramer is on a fascinating journey. She started off teaching in small-town USA. She married and had 2 children. Fast forward, and she's teaching at an international school in Hong Kong. Many of her students were, as Tina says, perceptual learners. Many found themselves somewhere on the spectrum between ADHD and autism, as did Tina's brilliant, if remote, engineer husband. The combination of challenges in her personal and professional life led Tina on a journey to better understand the mind-body connection as it relates to presence and empathy, and what she developed has implications for all of us. Please welcome Tina Kramer to Bump in the Road. Tina, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Good morning, Pat. Thank you so much for having me on Bump in the Road. So my background is in education. I was an elementary school teacher in Indiana. So I lived in small town, rural USA. I had the opportunity with my family to move to Hong Kong and teach in the international schools. So I became a 7th and 8th grade math and science teacher. Interestingly enough, I had students in my classes that were clearly intelligent. I was having these amazing conversations with these kids. And I had students from 23 different countries that I was teaching. And it really bothered me because I was having these amazing conversations with them, and then they were failing my classes. Like some of them, not even C's or D's, they were truly failing my classes. I will spare you the huge, long story, but I started doing research. I started looking into when you have intelligent, failing students, what does that mean and how could I help them? I came across information that talked about the gifts of a perceptual learner. Now, that means someone that is gifted in seeing in pictures. They think in 3D, tend to be very creative people who may think in terms of artists, engineers, pilots, those type of individuals. Now, being perceptually gifted truly is a gift, amazing, very creative people, but however, it also can be the source of the challenge. Oftentimes, we see individuals that are perceptually gifted have diagnoses or symptoms of dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, or the autism spectrum. So I literally traveled the world. I worked with Maori healers in New Zealand. I met with kinesiologists in Asia. I spent time with Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer. And then I'm presently in Arizona, and there's a gentleman that was down in Tucson, and he was an equine therapist. And having conversations about what we used to say learning disabilities, now I say learning differences, and how I could help these students succeed. Now, I'm going to take just a little bit of a right turn here, Pat, because in my personal life, I was in a very challenging marriage. I had been married for 30 years to this extremely intelligent, caring man. However, I would have to say marriage counselors were always a part of the equation. There was just a challenge in our marriage that we were always seeking help. We both were. He was very successful. So where I was at in small town USA, the doctors, the counselors, they would see the success they had in business. And what I was describing an individual that couldn't emotionally connect, someone that dealt with a lot of anxiety. The conversations were always about him and rarely about me. My children loved him. However, there was not a closeness there. And that had just always been my story. Well, the doctors were always a part of our life as well, because we were searching and always trying to help him with his anxiety, had ulcers, those type of things. When we got to Hong Kong, we're at the doctor as usual, as we always were. And about 10 minutes of the doctor meeting him, he said, "Have you ever considered that you have high functioning autism?" We no longer refer to it as Asperger's, but at that point in time, we were still saying Asperger's. Now, my personal life had crossed my professional life, and it became even more important for me to find answers. The marriage, of course, reached a point that we no longer thought it was wise to stay married. We were better friends, we were better parents, we ended up being business partners. But it was very important for my children to be able to connect to their father. So I continued down the path, trying to help him, trying to help my students. And long story short, I developed programs and I invented a sound device that helps increase focus because of this bump in the road. This definitely was my bump in the road. So that's a short version. Pat, what questions do you have?
Well, actually, I find the interaction with the Chinese doctors really interesting because allopathic medicine, which we have typically here in the States, is very different than that Eastern approach. How did that Eastern approach give you such a quick answer?
It's very interesting because the doctor, I mean, we were having a conversation. It really was 10 minutes. And he had an awareness. I mean, he had an awareness. He understood what I was describing because I was the one that was talking about our personal life. My ex-husband, of course, was talking about the anxiety and the stomach hurting and the ulcers and that type of thing. However, as we continued to see that doctor, it very much is part of the story is how I developed the programs that I did because they recognized energy and they recognized the energy of the body, and then they also understood presence and balance with ourselves. Now we use terms now. I've been in this work for about 15 years now, maybe a little longer than that actually. But we talk about being present with ourselves, identity of self. We talk about the balance of body, mind, and spirit. And the doctor that we were seeing there in Hong Kong, he worked in that. He looked at Ken from body, mind, and spirit and the balance of all three. What was out of balance? Ken spent most of his time in his mind. So he was a thinker. He was an engineer. He's an inventor. I mean, just incredibly creative and talented man. However, not truly in his physical body. And so then when you don't have the presence in the physical body, then the physical body tends to manifest ailments, illness, stress, anxiety. So that knowledge and looking at all three and bringing them in harmony is a huge part of the work that I do. And I learned that by being in Hong Kong.
Talk a little bit about the programs you created.
So, taking a look at the gifts of perceptually gifted individuals, so tend to be very creative individuals that have a mind that goes really fast. They don't realize how fast their minds are, and then teachers, people that are working with them, don't realize that either. Remember when I mentioned when I was talking to my students, the conversations these were students that had above average knowledge and intelligence and their ability to convey and talk to me. However, I could not produce that on their written work. So I started to take a look at their gifts and then how I could leverage gifts against weaknesses. Part of the gift of being a perceptual learner is going off into your imagination. So looking at pictures, thinking in 3D. If you could imagine, I don't know, if we had a stuffed animal, Pat, that I could hold up, then you can see. And I could turn that all different ways. Now, if you can see me right now, my hands are moving. But they can do that in their mind. Okay, but if I suggest the letter B, okay, the small letter B, if that movement starts to happen, that letter can change from a B to a P to a Q to a D. If that is just part of you, if that is just part of something you've experienced your whole entire life, we as teachers don't understand they're experiencing that. They just think everybody else is doing the same, not having any problems. And then they don't do well in school. So that movement, all right, that is our focus. We're taking our focus off into our imagination. So, first step is making them aware of that what we call a disorientation, making them aware of that movement and that gift that they have. Then, let's say I'm using the example of reading. In the case of reading, then they can actually stop the movement and see the letter as it is meant to be. Now, it's a very simple explanation, but that's part of the work that I do when I work with dyslexia. Now, we can go further then into ADD, ADHD, and autism. And we're talking about trends right now, but that is more affecting behavior. So remember what I said about body, mind, and spirit being out of balance?
Mm-hmm.
So then we start to look at how do we bring those in harmony? So the first thing is to create understanding. My work is very simple because it's at a foundational level. We're going back to possibly what we would be taught in kindergarten or first grade. But when we have a learning difference, we're not internalizing the information the same way as our neurotypical partners. So, like I said, the work is very simple that I do. So, creating an identity of self. Who am I? I was in a kindergarten class for a while, and one of the exercises we did is we had a huge sheet of paper, and we would have the children lay down on it and trace their bodies. So, what you're really doing at that point in time is creating an awareness of who they physically are. So my programs begin there. Now, I don't have anybody lay down on paper, but excuse me, those ideas, we start there. Then we move into the concept of change. So something becoming something else. Everybody on different levels tends to not, well, shall I say, we don't always like change depending on what it is. Some changes we love. When I'm dealing with somebody that has behavioral related issues, they usually don't have a clear understanding of change. So then we start to talk about change, again, at a very foundational level. We're taking a look at caterpillars changing into butterflies, tadpoles changing into frogs. And then I'm having a conversation with my student in such a way that they are starting to identify and talk to me about change in their own life, and then creating an understanding of what change actually is. There are about 10 of these base concepts that are part of neurotypical development. I don't like the word normal, but I say normal so people understand. When we're dealing with somebody that's perceptually gifted and it's manifesting in ADD, ADHD, or autism, that development is a little different. There's a little bit of a different understanding or misunderstanding that's happening. And so what a neurotypical individual learns just from life experiences, they are missing. So I'm going in and teaching those specifically in a way that is very, very hands-on and straightforward.
Getting people into their bodies, I think, is really hard today because everybody is living in their head with their electronic devices.
Yes.
What can we do? I mean, what are some of the simple things we can all do to root ourselves more in our physical presence?
So the number one thing, the more time you can spend outside, the better, and be barefoot. And that could just be in the backyard. If you can get off of pavement or cement, get actually on grass, get on ground. Like I said, I'm here in Arizona, so hiking is very popular here in Arizona, and it is so good. So most important, literally, walk on the ground because that does ground you. The other thing is I will ask my students or my clients, can you feel your toes? And they'll be like, what do you mean feel my toes? Of course I can feel my toes. And I'm like, but I want you to think about the bottom of your feet. And I want you to feel the bottom of your feet. And people laugh when I say this, but that automatically brings you down into your physical body when we start to think about that process. Yoga is amazing for grounding. It's a very good thing to do. And it doesn't need to be anything bendy, and it doesn't have to be any of that really fancy moves. It can be very basic practice of yoga.
So you can avoid downward dog if you want.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I do a lot of work. I do a lot of study in these areas. I Reiki individuals that know how to interact with energy. It's possible to actually pull an individual down into the body. I'm looking at somatic workshops right now. So these are individuals that are looking at the energy of the spine. And the energy of the spine is really quite complicated. There's 3 different patterns that move left to right, forward to back, and then there's actually a spiral as well. So I'm starting to meet with practitioners that understand the balance and what it should look like. And then through specific yoga moves, they can identify when the patterns are not working the way that they're supposed to, and then help to get them into the pattern that they should be. And then you see healing, because in adults that have learning differences, so oftentimes it manifests as anxiety and depression, and they never consider the fact that they even might have a learning difference. Sadly enough, they're the people that they're like, oh, I'm so stupid. I don't know left from right. I don't like that word at all. But people do use that. Not knowing left from right is a very common thing when you have a learning difference. They tend to be clumsy because there's not balance between where they think they are versus where their physical body actually is. So they're the individuals. There's the boy, or I should say girl as well, that goes to catch the ball, has the mitt in the air, and they still manage to get hit in the head.
Oh. No, go ahead.
Yeah, we actually can help an individual then create that balance between where they think they are and where they actually are, and then you see them be the ones that they can catch a ball and they can hit a ball and all of those things.
Now, this is so interesting because we, have a lot of kids diagnosed with ADHD in this country, and the first step always seems to be to put them on drugs.
Yeah. So, I am a teacher. I am not a doctor. I have been blessed. I would say 90% of my clients that come to me on meds will get off of their meds. I've not really mentioned much about the sound device, but I invented a sound device. Now, it's worn like a necklace. It's a small medallion about the size of a $50. And there is a specific frequency and tone that is heard every 8 seconds. Now, how I came up with this idea, I'm going to go back to when I was in the classroom full time. I figured out ways to hold my students' attention. There are very simple things that I did, but one of them was I would tap them on the shoulder. And then I started really thinking about what I was saying, because they would tell me, they'd be like, Mrs. K, I squirreled. I have no idea what you just said. Tell me what's going on. And I'd bring them back, and I really thought about that language. Well, you went off into your imagination. Let me bring you back. And I was doing that by a tap on the shoulder, saying their names, or having them move around the room. But if it was possible to bring them back, I thought there's got to be a way to bring them back when they're outside of my classroom, not just in the classroom. And that's how the idea of the sound device started. So, Pat, do you have a favorite song?
Oh, one that always comes to mind is Louis Armstrong's song about red roses too. What's the name of that?
I'm sorry, but I'm talking.
It's an old one, but a good one. But no, keep going. I'm not that musically inclined. I'm much more of a reader, an outdoors person, and that kind of thing. And I love quiet. Quiet for me is where I love to live.
Okay, and we need a balance of all. But the reason I asked you about your favorite song So hopefully your listeners have thought of their favorite song. Even though you didn't know the name of it, I saw your face change. So when you thought of your favorite song, you smiled. Music makes us feel, it helps us feel a certain way. Depending on our mood, depending on how we want to feel, we tend to have favorites because it helps us feel a certain way. I'm doing the same thing with the sound device. There are specific tones that are being used that pull someone out of their imagination and brings them back into balance with their physical body.
Do the tones rotate? And is there a specific pattern to that?
There is. Yes, absolutely. There is. Let me go back to the question. I went on this tangent again. So in talking about the ADHD and the meds, it tends to be an individual that is an incredibly fast thinker. Okay. They also tend to jump out. Remember, perceptually gifted. So if there's any type of confusion, they're going to jump out into their imagination to try to solve the confusion. So what that sound device is doing is bringing them back into the present, bringing them back into the now, and bringing them back into balance with the physical body. When that happens, they start to slow down. We start to decrease the amount of confusion because they're present. And in being in the now and present, we start to understand and internalize whatever is called that caused the confusion for us. So if I'm working with ADD or ADHD, we always start with the sound device, looking for that change, looking for that calming down or looking for that presence. Over time, as they listen, and if they do a program, I really love to work with families if I'm working with younger children. Then, of course, if I'm working with adults, they're responsible for themselves. And then you'll see over time, the need for the medication decreases. Now, my work is it's not a magic pill. Okay. It takes work, it takes commitment, it takes practice. They're learning. But if they stay on the path, almost always, again, I'm touching wood right now, I'm knocking on my desk, medication decreases or becomes a part of their past.
This is so interesting. It has parallels actually to a meditation mantra, which in meditation is used to bring you back to stillness so that your mind isn't wandering off, doing your to-do list or whatever. And if you flip this over into the tangible conscious world here, it's very similar. I mean, you're using, in this case, a tone to bring people back to presence. And I can so see how that would work.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And I even have, it's interesting that you bring up the meditation because I have people that are starting to use the sound device for meditation as well. Because if you have ADD or ADHD, I was diagnosed with ADD. I was close to 50 when I got a diagnosis of ADD. Meditation is a nightmare. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I was sitting trying to and my mind is just going 100 miles an hour and I could not calm it down. So for people like me that find meditation like, I just couldn't do it, they are starting to wear the sound device. And it's, again, it's a slowing, it's a presence, it brings them back to the body, and then they can actually get in that meditative state. So that's exciting and fun as well.
Earlier you mentioned equine therapy, and I had a guest recently who also brought that up and was talking about how horses are so present and emotional that they have such a grounding impact on people. What have you done with equine therapy? Because I hear the stories about this again and again, and it makes me very curious.
So horses and cows, believe it or not, are the most empathetic animals. If you're familiar with Temple Grandin is very famous for she is autistic and then received her PhD and she works with cattle. She's written several books. And I believe it is her that she has talked about the fact that both are very empathetic as far as animals. And if you have a learning difference, there's a connection that occurs with being empathetic. But the equine therapy works there's a handful of reasons why it works. Almost always your riding feet are in stirrups. Now that's grounding. If you think about actually having your feet in the stirrups and then the pressure that you're putting to balance left and right. Okay, so it's grounding because of the pressure that is put in the feet in the stirrups, and then also you're using left and right side, engaging left and right brain to create balance using the feet. So that in itself is huge. If we just talk about that, we could talk about that a lot, then the effect that it has on the body and the grounding effect of it. Then the other part of it, the energy of the animals. Usually in equine therapy, we're using calmer horses, and they understand energy. They understand the energy of the individual. When I spent time, so it was Wyatt Webb that did the equine therapy, and then I also got to spend time with Cesar Millan. And then he works with the dogs. And he talks about how our energy affects the animals and the animals react to it. I don't know if you've ever watched his show, but there's a point in time, even when you're just doing leash work with the dog, and he'll take the individual holding the leash and he'll be like, breathe, look out into the future, imagine a happy place. And it shifts the energy. It doesn't look like the person's really changed anything, but it shifts the energy and you see the dog calm down. In equine therapy, the horse usually is really calm and it's doing the opposite to the individual that's riding them. So the horse is incredibly calm and then it calms the individual. I don't know, Pat, how much like auras and energy and the connection between us and others. And in the equine therapy, imagine the horse has got this huge, calm, energetic ball around them. And then when we're actually riding or interacting with the horse, we get pulled into that and it's calming for us as well.
Just an anecdotal story. I think there's an enormous amount of wisdom to this idea of energy, music, connection, all this. I haven't watched TV for well over a decade. I just decided to turn it off. But one of the reasons I decided to turn it off is I noticed my cats would get kind of agitated with the constant background noise of news or TV or whatever. And when I turned off the TV, an aura of calmness came over them and over the house.
Yeah.
It was really incredible. And I haven't looked back, and I realize I'm an anomaly in this world, but I find not having TV to be a really important part of my peace of mind, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, you may be an anomaly, but you're ahead of the healing journey.
Speaking of the healing journey, could this device be an app?
I've looked at that, and I can't answer yet. It is part of the process that we're actually taking a look at. Is that makes sense or not? One of the interesting things about the sound device when you wear it, it can be turned down to the point that others around you can't hear it. So very, very low, and it's still working. And that's because of the frequency. That's part of the reason, that the frequency of the sound. So I don't know about the app yet. I haven't decided. We're continuing to do research. I'll let you know, okay?
Yeah, no, please. I find this really fascinating because it so parallels my meditation experience. And I know what a game changer that's been for me. And I can so see how people would benefit. And I think it goes way beyond the autistic spectrum that we're talking about. So many people are not present in this world. It's just astonishing. They're in their heads, they're wrapped up in whatever their thoughts are, but they're not here. And I think anything that would bring people here, as you were saying earlier, opens the door to empathy, which is just so lacking because people simply aren't present.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you.
And a little empathy might just change a lot of things.
Well, and so oftentimes the individuals that have learning differences are very empathetic people. That's when we get into the sensory related issues because they're kind of wide open. They're not kind of wide open. They are wide open. And we get into sensory related. So when you're just wide open in such a way, everything is coming in. If you're not getting support as how to manage that, it can become quite overwhelming. And then we then go into the anxiety and the depression and then the medication again. However, through meditation, through education, through an awareness of the energy, you can learn how to, if you will, turn the valve in such a way that you let in energy, and then you can also stop it as well. I
How
know this is part of my story. I used to get into large rooms or groups of people, and it was very overwhelming. I would even kind of start to shake a little bit. And part of my healing journey, it was learning how to manage that.
how has the sound device and all your research changed your family?
So my children are grown now. My son is 25 and my daughter is 21. They left their father, and their father loved them when they were young. But it's fair to say that he was not totally present because of the autism. And the work that we have done, because a lot of the work that I have done was experimental and me spending hours and hours with him and with the kids and just practicing trial and error. How could we help? How could we make a difference? And slowly over time, he began the individuation process himself. Now, he was well into his 40s when this happened. He started to understand how his actions affected others. And then he started to emotionally connect. Now, let me explain a little bit. There was a lack of understanding. We just did not understand. So, one of the examples, we always had dogs. I'm a dog person. We love dogs. When he would come into the room, the dogs would move away from him. And there was no obvious reason for this. He was not mean to them. He was not cruel. If I would say anything, he ignored them. But my children would be like, why don't the dogs like dad? They
Dogs
like mom.
know. Dogs are smart.
Yeah, what's up with dad? This was back before, we really understood what was going on with him. And there was a point in time to one of the dogs we had. It was a miniature schnauzer. I never paid any attention to him, would always move away when he walked in the room. He came in and sat down, and we've been doing a lot of work. And the dog came and sat on his foot. Now, somebody that doesn't know my life story and my children's life story would be like, okay, that's not that big of a deal. They might even laugh. We all began to cry. We realized he finally was finding that balance of body, mind, and spirit. My children now, as I said, they're adults. They always did things with their father, but it was stressful. Let me be honest. It was stressful for them. My daughter now talks about, hey, dad took me shopping and we had a great time and we laughed. My son plays golf with his father now. And he's like, you know what? Dad's actually kind of cool. We had a good time. If you understand that past story, if you have a story like mine, to where you have that loved one that it's not that you don't love them, but you can't totally relate to them, and to be given the gift of them becoming relatable and being able to relate to them. The anxiety and the depression that he used to deal with, he was an incredibly successful man, but he was never, ever happy. And he actually genuinely smiles. And it just about brings me to tears saying that to you. We've been given a gift from a really hard thing, a bump in the road.
Do you counsel people mostly in the greater Phoenix area now, or is your practice, can it expand beyond that?
It can. After the pandemic, we began to use Zoom, and I actually work internationally. I have clients in Hong Kong because I lived and taught in Hong Kong, and then I have clients all over the United States. I work with different ages. My youngest client was 8 years old. My oldest client was 58 years old, because There are so many people that have this story that have went undiagnosed, and I hear a lot about anxiety and depression, or the act of life. I feel like an actor in my own life. I I feel like I'm just barely holding it together all the time. I come home in the evenings and I'm so exhausted. I just, those tend to be the people that I work with. So now I work with adults and young adults, professionals. And then I have a good friend. I have a YouTube channel that I do with a good friend, and we talk about learning differences. And then she takes on school age children. So if you need help, give me a call and I can get in contact with the right people if I can't help you myself.
Where can people find you?
The best thing is to go to my website, and that's www.simplelearningedu.com. Send me a message and we'll have a conversation, because learning differences in our understanding and awareness of those, there's so much that we don't understand. And I would really prefer to just have a conversation with you, and let's decide if this is a good fit or not.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.